Welcome to this Meet the Critics session. My name's Claire Fox. I'm the director of the Institute of Ideas. I'd like to first of all commend our critics for having the nerve to turn out today. I know that when I've been talking to filmmakers, they've all said, critics, what do they know? And that phrase, those who can do, those who can't teach, has been quoted so often to me in relation to this session. What they mean by that is, of course, that these lot can't, which is why they criticise films. Let's see whether they've got anything to say. It's an important subject because the art of criticism, or whether you can actually have a criticism of a film and whether the critics have got anything to add to the interpretation of that film or to help the audiences understand that film, is something that actually every filmmaker should take seriously. I'm glad that we've got some critics here to do that. I'm going to quickly introduce them. They're going to then do live criticism, full and frank, which they're brave to do, on 5 films which we've selected. And then we're going to have a discussion right at the end with the audience. You can either come in and talk about any of the films we've discussed, but in a way more appropriately to talk about what is the point of a critic in the first place, and so on. So let's start. First of all, we've got Nick Bradshaw, who's the web editor of Sight and Sound magazine. Before that, he was bringing Sight and Sound into the digital age. He was deputy film editor at Time Out. He's written for loads of publications on film, and he's the co-editor of the DVD Stack. Then we've got Danny Lee, who is a critic mainly at The Guardian. He's a writer and broadcaster. He's actually a novelist as well. He's written 2 novels and is writing a 3rd. He's written for a range of publications, websites and so on, mainly for The Guardian, and he co-hosts BBC One's film programme. Next, we've got AJ Shank, who's a filmmaker and writer based in Los Angeles. His films, he actually makes films, more appropriately, and has made many important films, and is working on many more at the moment. And he can tell us about what the relationship between being a filmmaker and a critic is, as well as anything else. I'm delighted to have AJ here, because I always like what he's got to say, and he's always provocative and prepared to say some unpopular things. Next is Jennifer Merrin, who I hadn't known before today, but I know is a troublemaker before we start. She covers documentaries for About.com. She's a film critic for Women's E-News, president of the Alliance of Women Film Journalists, has a column for LA Times, Chicago Tribune, and many other outlets. Grew up in Hollywood, now New York-based, and is an outspoken advocate for documentary films. And finally, we have my colleague Angus Kennedy, who produced this session. He's also the chair of the Institute of Ideas Economy Forum, head of external relations at the Institute of Ideas. He writes reviews for Spiked and Culture Wars, comes from an IT consultancy background, really isn't a critic, but is always critical and a troublemaker in our office. So he'll have something interesting to say as well, I hope. Okay, we're going to start with a film called Resurrect Dead, which is up for an Innovation Award. It's Resurrect Dead, The Mystery of the Toynbee Tiles by John Foy. It was shown last night, and in fact, Angus did a Q&A with John. I'm going to see a clip from the film, first of all, and then I'm going to ask the panel what they think of it. It's not showing again at the festival, but I'd really recommend that you go and see it in the videotheque. Okay, thanks.
They are mysterious markers with bizarre messages.
Artists or pranksters have been sticking these plaques on roadways in other places around the globe for years now.
Toynbee idea in Kubrick's 2001.
Resurrect dead on planet Jupiter.
I have no idea what it means.
Maybe it's a message from space.
The plaques were first sighted in the early 1980s. There are 130 known plaques, most in the U.S.
Philadelphia, Baltimore,
New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, St. Louis.
Plus, they have been spotted in South America.
City officials we contacted were not aware of their existence.
It's anybody's guess what the meaning really is or who's behind it.
So who is placing these tiles all over Philadelphia and all over the world for that matter.
It's like a scene from the Twilight Zone.
I've never seen one.
Okay, Danny, I'm going to start with you. This is a quirky, interesting mystery. What do you reckon?
Quirky, interesting, both of those things. I think for sheer likability, it's certainly my favourite of the 5 films we're going to talk about today. I think, having seen an awful lot of the documentaries that are in the festival, I think it's possibly one of my favourite of the whole bunch. It's incredibly engaging. I think Justin Deer is wonderfully compelling character, and I think you're drawn into to his life straight away, or I was anyway. I don't know if it's strange. I mean, I'd be interested in someone's reaction if they were coming from the film, having grown up in rural Shropshire, and spent their entire time living in the countryside. Because I think if you're from a city, and I've spent most of my life in London, city life is full of these kind of perplexing mysteries that sort of nag away, your subconscious as you're going about your daily business. And it's so, I think one of the things I liked so much about the film was just the idea that here was one of them, and someone had just kind of mined into that and bored into that, and until they actually found a solution. Every piece of graffiti, in the city is a mystery of sorts, and that's what I liked about the film, and I did really like it. It's just that sense of latching onto something and just not letting go.
So here we have mysterious tiles appearing all around American cities and further. And this is a kind of mystery narrative as to who is putting the tiles down, because it's anonymous.
Absolutely. It's centred around Philadelphia, which is which is where the film mostly takes place and where Justin Deer is from. But I think then it sort of spreads out from there, and there's even sightings in South America. Yeah, in Chile, isn't it? Which does throw the investigation off course for a while. I think as a mystery, I think it works really nicely. I also think one of the things which is great about it, I think, is that Justin Deer is treated very sympathetically without being sort of soft-soaped. He's not. Justin Deer himself could be held up and sort of slightly ridiculed as an obsessive. I'm slightly kind of obsessive myself, so I was glad to see and gratified to see that he wasn't, and that there's a nice kind of the point about Justin Deer's almost mirror image being in the culprit or the kind of suspects for the Toynbee Toils is one which is very sort of gracefully made. Because it is a film about obsession, and it's full of obsessives, and it's about an obsessive attempting to find an obsessive. But again, they don't hold Justin Deer up to any ridicule, the filmmakers. And
I think it was quite interesting meeting John last night to discover that he's one of the obsessives. But maybe, Angus, do you want to just say what your thoughts are?
Chatting to John last night, he reveals that the 3 guys in the detectives, Justin, Stephen, Colin, there are 4. He's the 4th, but doesn't put himself into the film, and he is very much part of that obsession. I think he actually more or less believes in the possibility of molecules being reassembled. He stressed that he doesn't believe in the supernatural, but he thinks that maybe we are biologically capable of being resurrected. But I think I broadly agree with Danny, but the thing is that the obsession kind of plunges you right down deep into these individual characters. Everybody in the film is kind of weird and kooky and offbeat. And the minority association that Sevi Werner / James Marasco has set up, I think is a metaphor for everybody in it. Everybody comes across as like their own little minority association. Everybody pursuing their own little strange takes in the world. In a way, I wondered, in the absence of the kind of big dreams of civilization that the Toynbee Tile messages kind of hope for. It's obviously made by a guy in the delusion of a conspiracy theory, Cold War, 1983. We can understand the kind of context of that. But today, and they're still going on, interestingly, and they're now kind of copycat Tylers putting these things out there. It spoke to me a bit of the absence of the American dream, if you like. It was a kind of we're just isolated minority, kind of off-the-wall types, and the best we can do is dream of Jupiter. Not that that's a bad thing. I think we should have big ambitions, but it just seemed to have become a different thing than it was in 1983 and speak to more wider social concerns. in a way that made it very interesting. And why is it that people are still so obsessed and fascinated by conspiracy theories, maybe more so than they used to be?
AJ, what did you reckon?
Well, I was just going to say that I think one of the things that I think is difficult and that I sympathize with critics generally is that a lot of times what you feel about a film is often affected by what happens in the ending. But the ending is very hard to talk about most of the time because you don't want to be a spoiler, because then you'll get tons of comments about how you're a terrible spoiler of the ending. And so I won't spoil the ending, but I except to say that the mystery is only partially solved in that they have a very good, strong working theory of who this person is, but then at the end it sort of leaves it that potentially that it could be someone else. And so I'm always sort of interested when directors choose to stop making films. And so that, I know John worked on it for many years, and I'm just curious if when he made the decision to say, like, I'm going to pull the plug now, if he would have gone another 6 months or 9 months, maybe that would just be futile. But I agree. I mean, I think, it's always good to see nerds on patrol, and the nerds in this film are pretty awesome. And there are a lot of really great moments of revelation in them tracking down the mystery. These sort of like, you get a little bit of a chill that like they've come across some connection that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, it's an entertaining documentary, and we can always use more of those.
Nick, I just wondered, I mean, the only thing I'd say, I mean, I enjoyed it too, but the only thing I'd say was I felt at times it could do with a good edit. I think it's a bit thin. Go on.
I occasionally felt a little impatient that...
Speak to the mic.
Sorry, is this not coming over? I occasionally felt a little impatient with the storytelling. I thought that, I think those 10 minutes you could have taken out. I felt that there was a certain amount of repeated information and overlapping of sound and image, and images just telling you what you'd already just heard. I agree that the film itself, the sympathy that it had for the characters and their journey of obsession, it pulled you in, and there was an eeriness that you could feel, and I can see that the project of making a whole film about them makes the film a sort of expression of that obsession as well as a story about it. But it's actually such a small subject for that obsession that it did need to find a way to open it up and tell you why these guys were hanging on this for so many years of their life, and why that should matter to us.
Yeah, I mean, I have some sympathy with that, just in terms of where its weaknesses lay. But Jennifer, what's your thoughts?
Last word. I agree with most of what's been said, and would only add that I feel, again, in the structuring of this, we have a kind of a repeat of tiles, talk, and agreed that as we do tiles, talk, we progress a bit with the plot each time, and the mystery progresses, and there are clues that come up and answers that I found very interesting. I did not know about these tiles, so it was interesting to me that there's something out there that people are obsessing about that's quirky and fun and perhaps even intellectually challenging that I didn't know about, that I'm now aware of. That, I think, is a very good thing. I think that the filmmaker, this is a first film, I think the filmmaker didn't have at his command all of the vocabulary of filmmaking to be able to use to really engage me and express his thoughts, his own obsessions more interestingly. Occasionally there were graphics that were used. Those were fun and good. I think he could have gone further. I think that at this particular point in documentary filmmaking, that there are a lot of technique, stylistic elements that are usable, that are acceptable now, that can be used and should be used. And I don't think that he was aware of all of them. when AJ says that the mystery is not solved, that's fine. A film, whatever, in documentary, whatever happens at the end of the film, in real life, that story goes on. So there has to be some kind of an engagement. The audience has to engage in some way in what's going to happen after the conclusion of the film, with the subjects, with whatever. Whether the mystery is solved or not, I, as a viewer, was not engaged to the extent that I would go after solving that mystery. In other words, I would not become one of the people who is now obsessed or even curious about whether all of this matter we can reassemble on Jupiter or anyplace else. I wasn't even really made aware that the theory is a serious one that might need to be considered seriously. You know, whether this is a thought that we should be having about long-term life or whatever it is. That was not part of the discussion in the film. It did not make me need to go sign a petition. It did not make me need to go out and change gas companies. I mean, it's a quirky, small film, I understand, but it should take me further into the subject so that I want to take some kind of action or become involved in some way, and that it did not do.
Yes.
Why?
I don't buy that at all.
Yeah. First of all, Danny, then AJ.
I just don't buy that argument. I don't see that the end of any film, actually, whether it's fiction or it's documentary, should lead you to do something or take action. I mean, clearly, there's a whole school of important and worthwhile and very well-made activist filmmaking going on, which is brilliant. But the idea that every documentary or every film has to inspire some kind of further investigation or some sort of further, I don't agree. I guess that's a fundamental philosophical
Now, I wasn't saying, can I just clarify, I wasn't saying that I needed to go out and sign a petition after this one. This is clearly not that category of film. What I'm saying is that it did not engage me to the extent that I was curious to investigate the subject further.
Okay, AJ.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm curious on a larger scale, because obviously there's, social activist films are one genre of documentary filmmaking, but there's so many others. And what do you want a film to do for you that, I mean, in this case, investigate further, but like I guess we're about to talk about If a Tree Falls, and I don't want to transition before you're ready, but I'm curious, like a film like that is telling, what, happened in a police investigation. What do you want that film to do for you to push you further, other than tell you the story of what happened?
Right, Jennifer, don't answer that now because we are going on. But just, is there anything else on Resurrect Dead just before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I thought I was engaged afterwards, not to go out and find my own Toynbee tiles, but just to talk to people about what the film meant. And that kind of intellectual engagement with the ideas of it seemed to be enough for me.
Okay, anything else?
Well, I was just going to pick up on Angus's earlier point, actually. I do think there's another film to be made almost about the phenomenon of the tiles and the way that the tiles people have, because clearly this is completely decontextualised, because nobody knows what the mystery was, but people you were still having these copycat tilings going on. And I do think that's a fascinating phenomenon, the idea that people were just taking this thing as just this empty kind of urban lore, and just sort of spreading it around the world. It's a fascinating idea. What did that mean to anyone else? We spent 90 minutes trying to puzzle out what it meant to the guy who actually put them down in the first place. Why were other people doing this?
There's actually, I feel slightly spoiled by the festival this year, but there's another documentary, Shut Up Little Man, in the festival that kind of does exactly that, does have that wider perspective on a cult that's sort of a cult obsession that's sort of exploded through the San Francisco underground.
I actually thought exactly what you've just said, which is I thought I want a film about the people who've made this film and what's going on and why everyone's so interested in it. I think Louis Theroux was in the film showing last night. Maybe he's about to make it, but that was kind of like, and it really was a kind of what. But the shortwave radio people, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's worth going to the film to see the shortwave radio phenomena people. They couldn't be made up and were brilliant. No, but and John told a story about he was kind of doing one film showing and they all turned up to watch it and cheered. That was good. Anyway, right, moving on. Right, we're going to do two films together now. If a Tree Falls, a story of the Earth Liberation Front, which is a film by Daniel McGowan. It's actually showing after this in Showroom 2. And we're also going to look at, together with it, Up in Smoke, which is a film by Adam Wakeling, which is on at 4:30 today in Showroom 1. And both of them are up for the Sheffield Green Awards. Both of them have a kind of eco theme. Both of them feature trees. That's about it in terms of what they've got in common. The trees are not in the same countries or anything. You know, one's Honduras, one's in the US. But there is a kind of link between them. And I think we get into the social activism film, what is documentary for, when we look at these. So can we see the two clips back to back on this, please?
On the night of the arson, they put on their masks and then placed the 5-gallon fuel containers and activated the timing devices.
The Earth Liberation Front is turning up the heat again, igniting devastating blazes all across the country.
Fire bombings included attacks on lumber mills, wild horse corrals, and meatpacking plants.
This investigation was the largest domestic terrorism case in the history of the United States.
Sometimes when you see things you love being destroyed, you just want to destroy those things. I was like, man, this is butchered. It made me think, like, why are we being so gentle?
The goal is to just send a message that consumer America is destroying the world.
When the big bad bully gets hit in the stomach and feels a little fear, that felt good.
After the fire, you really looked over your shoulder.
People go home at night wondering if they're going to be a target. That's what terrorism is.
Eco-terrorism.
Eco-terrorist.
Eco-terrorism. Environmental terrorism.
The police were amping up their presence, and people's views got hardened.
This is what we want you to do. We want you to wear a wire.
You don't have to be Bonnie and Clyde to be a bank robber, and you don't have to be Al-Qaeda to be a terrorist.
No one got hurt, no one was injured, and yet I'm facing life plus 335 years. I'm not suggesting that the path of destruction is the right path. When you're screaming at the top of your lungs and no one hears you, what are you supposed to do?
The old adage that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter is true.
Ahora se camina hasta de noche. En aquel tiempo no se caminaba de noche. Porque era montaña. Era montaña para venir aquí.
You're looking at a slowly enacted catastrophe. The consumption of the remaining rainforests of the world in exchange for temporary food cropping cannot make sense. There are 2 million slash-and-burn farmers in Honduras. There's a population of 5 million. But it's in the order of a few 100 million families worldwide. 1 billion tons of carbon straight up into the atmosphere annually. We need to take that in. That's what drives what I do.
Se quema para que quede limpia la tierra. Yo sé que se va deteriorando la tierra, pero no tenemos otra opción para poder sembrar. ¿Me entiendes?
Me pongo a analizar y digo yo, lo que dice la escritura es que el hombre se va a destruir por sí mismo.
Poco a poco tenemos que ir aprendiendo a cambiar de sistema. Ojalá que no sea muy tarde.
You're simulating what's going on in the forest. You're not trying to fight it. People have got to be able to get their hands on it and see it. All it would take is one politician to get gripped by it. One politician to say, yeah. It's got to work. It's going to work. It's going to take whatever it takes to make it work. It's been 20-something years. I'm not going to give up now.
Okay, Nick, I'm going to ask you first. What did you make of both these films? If you can kind of do it as a double. Or
yeah,
either.
I'm sure I can. I've only just watched If a Tree Falls, so it's still kind of settling in a bit. But, I mean, it didn't scintillate me with its filmmaking flair or any kind of innovation or snazzy tricks. But actually, I thought it was really strong. I thought that the story needed to be told. I'm glad I've heard it. And I thought it told it really well. It was simple but lucid and fascinating, and just some of the footage they had of the way the Oregon police had beat up these protesters and just sort of very, very slowly and carefully sort of painted gas into their eyes and whatnot, and the way, the sort of viciousness that they'd gone after these guys. I mean, they keep the law, but this protagonist, he'd stopped, and he's facing sort of 300 years in jail. I thought that was just a really strong, solid piece of storytelling. They got, all the access they needed. They talked to the protagonist. They talked to the other side.
And what about the other one then? Very different.
Yeah, I can't say all that about the other one. I don't feel that the story was actually all there in the film. Really, I think that there were questions still left hanging. It's you sort of need a wider perspective, and you need to talk to people who aren't funding this program. Ask them what he's doing wrong, if he is on, if he does have this great cure or not. It was a sort of diaristic filmmaker getting interested and going and spending his life with this character, and I didn't feel that was quite enough to bring the story alive, really.
AJ, I mean, just comparing the two films for me, I mean, one of the things that struck me was, I think in the blurb for If a Tree Falls, it says it's a battle in which good and evil are far from clearly defined, and I thought that was true. It was complicated. You didn't quite know. I mean, it comes from a perspective, but it tells a story, but it's a complicated story. And who is a terrorist and what is a terrorist actually ends up where I think, well, I don't know that you can go around doing big arson attacks and not take any consequence, even though I've got some sympathy with you. Whereas the Up in Smoke, I was meant to really want to be on the side of this scientist who was going to solve the world's problems, but I ended up thinking, well, I don't know if you're a nutter or not. I mean, I just had no idea. It wasn't, because it was kind of quirky like the guys with the tiles. But in this instance, we were being asked to support him. So very different types of film.
Well, I agree with both of what you said. I think that, to me, what struck me about Up in Smoke is that I knew that there's going to be a campaign now to use the film to help his cause. And so it actually didn't feel like a film to me. It felt more like the introductory argument that he can take to meetings with people who might be able to give him money to do this. And so I know that this is a part of some of what happens and the term campaign films. I mean, this really felt like a campaign film because it is it's the sort of the kickoff of the campaign. So in that way, I wasn't convinced. And the other thing I think is, and that it's challenging with documentaries as a filmmaker and as a viewer, is when you don't have the best characters. You may have a great subject, but the characters aren't great. I think that that's certainly the case in Up in Smoke. Daniel, the lead in If a Tree Falls, isn't the best character in the world. But why I think that If a Tree Falls is by far my favorite film of this bunch. I think that Marshall is such a strong filmmaker and has built a story around this sort of flawed character that walked into his life, and then did exactly what you said, which is found a way to reach everyone around, including people who he had victimized. And it's, in the end, I think the story that it tells is extraordinarily compelling and complicated. And to me, who never, living in the States, never quite understanding what happened in Seattle, why there were these mass protests in Seattle, this film gave me more insight into that than anything I had seen to date. So I felt like I learned an incredible amount I think it's a great police procedural, and yeah, it's one of my favorite films of the year.
I agree. Jennifer?
Yeah, I like this film very much as well. One of the things that I look at and sort of try to hope is accomplished, that a film becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And this film succeeds in that admirably. In that,
so this is If a Tree Falls Now, not Up in Smoke.
Yeah. I mean, Marshall, and I think in looking at this film, it's also valuable to have seen Marshall's other films and to understand Marshall as a filmmaker. He is an extraordinary filmmaker. He is an incredibly empathetic filmmaker. And I think that he could take the hardest, most brutal and vicious kind of subject or situation and give it a very human and very understandable view. I mean, he draws us into his subject. Again, I agree that the central character is not the strongest, but he has not played that central character as the entire film, and that's very much to his credit. It's a film that I've had discussions with Marshall about the film, and it's a film that doesn't play to one side or the other. And it really challenges an audience member to think about what's being presented, what's happened. This is the kind of film that really makes you want to go further and investigate. It doesn't call for you to take any action. It's not an advocacy film in that regard. But it does make you want to know more and to find out and to follow its subject after the film is finished. Up in Smoke is a film that I would be, because of my own political outlook, would be very prone to support, and yet I do find that it's very limited in making its cause. As AJ said, I think it's a campaign film. It's an advocacy film that does not succeed in completely engaging you in, or making you believe in its subject, in the veracity or the possibility of the solution that it's putting forth. Again, I think that the guy who's the central character is kind of, he's not very charismatic. It's sad that he's not. But I think that that you also feel that the situation is rather sad, and I am curious about what follow-up will occur. But again, it's lacking, and because it's lacking, because it's not a really good film, it will reach fewer people. It doesn't serve its purpose really.
Angus, your thoughts on both of them?
Yeah, I mean, if you contrast the two, I mean, it's useful to put them together, I think, because Up in Smoke, you've got people burning nature in order to live and survive, and Tree Falls, you've got people burning down civilization and destroying other people's livelihoods for what?
For nature.
Which is kind of the question. Well, I mean, I don't know, but on the Seattle point, I mean, AJ, I thought I actually understood less about what they were doing in Seattle now that I've seen the film than I did from following the news at the time. There's a moment when they're on the streets in Seattle where they're confronted by cops with rifles, and a police captain says, if you guys don't move, you will become the subject of pain. And that kind of really struck me. It's like, because I thought they were already the subjects of pain. Right? Their existential angst in Tree Falls is so noticeable that Daniel is this incredible, ingenue city boy from Rockaway Beach who goes, overnight his mind is changed by meeting some environmentalist activists, which should always make you suspicious. Overnight, his mind is changed, and then he goes out into the woods and he's like, hello nature, hello trees, hello sky, this is wonderful. People are destroying it, that's terrible, we must do something about it. And he's known as the disgruntled one. So he already is this guy who is unhappy with the world he's in, he's trying to make sense of it, and this seems a ready written narrative for him. I hate, US consumes too much, I hate consumers, I hate people who make things, I hate producers, I hate people, basically, is what he's saying. And in the trailer, that's made clear, is that sometimes you have to destroy the things you love. The tragedy of the film, I think, is that he finds out that you can't live like that. And when he's faced with life imprisonment plus 335 years, it's like, uh-oh, I've got loved ones, you know? Maybe there's something more to misanthropy to base my life on. And it's kind of, that's the sad thing. Not so much that he's been branded a terrorist, but that he has not been able to make sense of his life. Very briefly on the Up in Smoke, I agree with what's been said about the Brit scientist. He does come across as a kind of monomaniacal character, also a bit like country gent in a way, because he's contrasted with the people in Honduras. So he works on this huge farm in Cornwall, in which he's always, the shots are standing alone in the middle of this huge field, presumably paid for by the European Common Agricultural Policy. I don't know. Going over in kind of moments of peasant porn, poverty porn, right? Because they do have a lot of, isn't it marvelous, the pigs are running around and the little girls in the dirt, right? Which is not good things. Telling the people what to do. And in fact, what I liked about it is that they don't listen to him, right? He gets completely ignored. The movement to start the double planting of the trees and so on is because the guys are talking to each other, and they want to do this out of their own self-interest because they don't have to keep moving all the time and building new houses. So they actually want to improve their lifestyle towards presumably something a bit like the United States, so they don't need to destroy trees.
Okay, thanks. Nick? I'm sorry, Danny. Danny is the one who hasn't yet.
Well, I'm glad Angus got there before me about If a Tree Falls, because I was worried I was going to be kind of catastrophically out of step. I felt quite uncomfortable with a lot of aspects of the film. I think the archive footage from the late 90s is very strong, but I think there's almost a better documentary to be made about Seattle and about the whole kind of that whole era and protest. I mean, this isn't it, and I think what it then becomes is a study in either or, in which both sides are sort of faintly repellent, actually. I mean, Daniel McGowan is I think by the end there's I don't want to spoil the film for people, but he's a complex character. For much of the film, I felt more than alienated. I felt slightly repulsed, as I say, by him, because I think, as Angus has said, his take on the world is so aggravatingly juvenile that it actually just sets your teeth on edge. On the other side, you've got, I didn't feel that the film actually, although the archive footage of the cops, tear gassing people up trees and rubbing pepper spray into people's eyes, is incredibly angering. The film didn't really seem to do anything with that footage other than just present it. And then the film sort of veers off into this kind of pseudo crime watch, of tracking down the bad guys. And I felt actually what I'm sure was conceived of as being even-handed and being impartial. I mean, actually, I just seem to think I don't actually sympathise with anyone here. You've got on one side of things rich kids and smackheads, and on the other side you've got these sort of venal cops who aren't really held to account. I think if there's any kind of good guys by the end of the film, it's these kind of gruff but essentially decent mustachioed cops. I felt really uncomfortable with that whole thing.
You felt uncomfortable liking the cops and
the
prosecutors?
I felt uncomfortable. I felt it was a film that made me on a lot of levels uncomfortable from start to finish. Up in Smoke didn't make me feel particularly uncomfortable at all, which I think is possibly one of its failings. I mean, there's this sort of mood of there's for what is clearly an incredibly urgent subject, there isn't very much urgency about the film, and I think Mike Hand comes across as an engaging enough guy, but yeah, certainly in terms of lighting a fire under people, it doesn't happen.
Well, I'd like to say if a Tree Falls, I mean, I agree with a lot of the comments about Daniel as a central character, but I don't think that takes from it as a film. I mean, I actually thought it was a brilliant film, but I thought the comments on Daniel is what the film gives you. I mean, you get to see all that because you get to see that. I mean, I think the thing about Mike Hands in Up in Smoke is that he's presented as a hero, actually, by the filmmaker, but you're kind of looking the whole time going, now, is it just a world conspiracy that every scientist, the whole of the UN, anyone he ever talks to says, yes, thank you, Mike, go away? Because it might just be that you're not saying anything, not because your character isn't charismatic enough, but because you haven't got a point. This is not scalable, upable. What are you talking about? So it becomes an advert for a campaign that I'm not actually given an opportunity to interrogate.
Mm-hmm. Nick and actually me and Nick were talking about this on the way down. There is a really fascinating story there, potentially, which is, if Up in Smoke is about the silver bullet, and the silver bullet isn't being funded, why? But I think you do come out of the film thinking, why?
Yeah, and maybe it's a conspiracy, but we weren't even, I don't necessarily know that it is, but you need to then investigate that. Why is it that there's a world conspiracy of scientists who know this stuff, who are not taking any notice of him? It seemed just a question mark hanging. Any final thoughts on any of this?
I'd like to say that I find listening to the other people on the panel very interesting because filmmakers, when they're making, when they're making movies, they make decisions and they edit and they tell a story and they present images. And to me, it's very interesting that we've seen among us the same film but very different films. And I find that quite fascinating. To me, that means that the filmmaker has not quite presented a clear, well, you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I'd just like to...
It's not there objectively.
I'd also like to apologise to Marshall for misnaming him earlier. But anyway, moving on swiftly after my mistake to something what can only be described as completely different. We now have the 9 Muses, which is up for the Innovation Award by John Akinfra. Can we show the clips, please?
To begin at the beginning. It is spring, moonless night in the small town, starless and Bible black, the cobbled streets silent and the hunched quarters and rabbits wood limping invisible down to the slow black, crow-black fishing boat bobbing sea. The houses are blind as moles, though moles see fine tonight in the snouting velvet dingles, or blind as Captain Cat there in the muffled middle by the pump and the town clock, the shops in mourning, the welfare hall in widow's weeds, and all the people of the lulled and dumbfound town are sleeping now. Hush, the babies are sleeping, the farmers, the fishers, the tradesmen and pensioners, cobbler, schoolteacher, postman and publican, the undertaker and the fancy woman, drunkard, dressmaker, preacher, policeman, the webfoot, cockle women, and the tidy wives. Young girls lie bedded soft or glide in their dreams with rings and trousseaux, bridesmaided by glowworms down the aisles of the organ-playing wood. The boys are dreaming wicked, or of the bucking ranches of the night and the jolly Rogered sea. And the anthracite statues of the horses sleep in the fields, and the cows in the byres, and the dogs in the wet-nosed yards. And the cats nap in the slant corners, or lope, sly, streaking and needling on the one cloud of the roofs. You can hear the dew falling, and the hushed town breathing. Only your eyes are unclosed to see the black and folded town fast and slow.
Okay, this is described as utterly unique, genre-defying, a trip through Britain's post-war mass migration using Homer's Odyssey as a foundation, with modern recasting of the epic poem in 9 overlapping musical chapters. And that kind of sums up what it's about, really. Actually, there might be some pretentious things in the film, but the French subtitles aren't normally there, so we don't want to critique it for the wrong reasons. Jennifer, your thoughts on 9 Muses?
Oh my God. I don't get this film. I'll be right up front about it. I get all of the elements. I get I get that it's beautiful, I get that it's moving, I get that it's poetic, I get that it's lyrical, I get that it's about what it's about, and yet I don't get the film. So this is a lot of parts that don't add up to me to be a film, let alone greater than the sum of it. And I've watched the film now 3 times, and because I do that when I don't get films. And I just have to say, I just don't get it. I mean, okay, fine, but it's a film that I would never write about, actually, because I don't get it.
Okay, Angus?
Well, I mean, I was going to say something similar, but now that I've seen it with French subtitles, I might have to revisit all my opinions, because it was like 100 times better all of a sudden, because just the existence of French subtitles made you think, it doesn't matter that I don't get it, and I agree that I don't get it, because some French genius probably does. Unfortunately, the version I watched twice didn't have them, and I mean, it was funded by the Film Council, and I think that fact alone, for me, kind of lightened the blow of the death of the Film Council. So maybe we won't get any more about it. I mean, it's trying to be something very clever. I mean, there must be something going on about colour here. We have landscapes which are bleak with somebody with a bright jacket on, and then black and white films of black immigration into white Britain. That must be really clever at some level. I didn't quite get that what it was. Maybe it would have worked better in 1975 or 1980 even, but I don't think the reality, if it is about contemporary immigration and black identity questions in Britain today through the odd vehicle of a tone poem, whatever that might be, I think it completely misses what's going on in contemporary Britain with open borders across Europe. Immigration playing a very, very different role in relationship to people's lives today. Anti-racism being the new norm, if you like, rather than racism being a real problem. I mean, I've just been reading articles how Cockney's not really spoken in London anymore. Everybody speaks Jaffracan. It's kind of patois. There's a lot of integration in a lot of British cities. And so it doesn't seem to touch on that. So it's certainly timeless in that sense, but maybe not in a good way.
Okay. AJ?
Yeah, I couldn't tell if it was amazing or shit. Like, it was... I felt so... I felt like I couldn't judge it because I maybe similar to what Angus said, that I'm sure that there are people who could probably speak eloquently about why it's very successful and what the pieces were. There was no introduction, as to what the archival material was. So it wasn't until after I watched the film and I read what it was about that I was like, oh, but it still didn't really make sense to me. In the end, I thought it would be something I would have rather have encountered in a museum where it was playing on a loop, and I would sit and watch for 10 minutes or so, and then go look at another piece of artwork. It does strike me as a piece of modern art in a way, but it didn't. In the end, I didn't get. I don't think I didn't get what they wanted me to get.
Okay. Anyone else?
Well, I mean, I think the point we should make about the film is that I think it did actually come out of being an installation, and I think it works, or would work on that level. It's almost like, I mean, the most obvious reference is someone like Matthew Barney, where you actually just think, watching this as, I don't know about anyone else, but I did, watching it on the screen of my MacBook just seemed a complete exercise in futility. Yeah. And I mean, I take responsibility for that. You should see this film on the biggest screen possible, so it's going to see it at the cinema, or they should give the IMAX over to this to properly assess it. I think actually, so in a sense, I think our judgments are a little bit flawed anyway, because we're not seeing this film as it should be seen. What I think is interesting, the only thing I'd add is that, I mean, this film is incredibly oblique. It is beautiful, and I don't think we should be dismissive of that. It is beautiful, but it is willfully oblique and willfully hard to kind of engage with. And I do think it's interesting. This is, I think, one of only 2 of the films we're talking about today which has actually got British theatrical distribution. So actually there are much more accessible films floating around which aren't going to be seen in British cinemas, and this one will. So
I mean, what I felt frustrating when I was watching it was, one was, because I know the filmmakers obsessed with that archive footage, but I wanted to see the archive footage without the rest of it. I mean, I just felt frustrated that I wasn't seeing the archive footage made into something that was, well, that I understood. So I was kind of frustrated that there it was, but it became less accessible to me, even though I was getting glimpses of it. And secondly, I should love all the elements of this. I mean, I'm very interested in the issues around racism and immigration.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also, you know, a nut about literature. I love the kind of music soundtrack. But the pretentious bit for me was that it didn't tell you who the quotes were from.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, if this is meant to introduce any new person to the world of literature, you can't sit through that and then wait till the end to try and work out that the quote that you were hearing was from that. And unless you are, if you know that already, then you're talking to a small audience. Mm. And if you're talking to somebody who, I am from a literature background and I couldn't work out, I mean, it's like spot there, oh, that's under Milkwood, Dylan Thomas, I Feel Better, but I'm not quite sure which Shakespeare play that's from, I'm not quite sure. Then in the end, I just felt like somebody was being clever at my expense, not trying to help me gain some access into the world of literature.
I mean, I just feel obliged to speak up for the filmmaker because he's not here. I mean, I feel the same, but then I would also imagine that the counter-argument would be, yeah, but you don't need, why would you need to know where this is sourced from? Surely you should let the words...
Well, I was going to say maybe the first importance is what the words say, and where they're from is secondary. I mean, I kind of agree. I've struggled with that too, but...
Except that it wasn't set up. It wasn't set up that the words were saying huge amounts to me, so I wouldn't have minded a little bit of educational guide. Sure. All I'm saying is, if the idea was that literature was being put into some context of a film, that people would have some access to the literature, then you need to indicate that it's the literature. We didn't even know it was literature, did we? Was it anyone else, unless you recognise the words?
Well, no, but again, I mean...
I know you do at the end, you get my point.
I think some of it was actually songs. I think I recognised the Schubert lyrics from... I think it was a Winter Ice.
Anyway, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, I now feel compelled to stick my hand up and say I think I liked it more than all of you, but I agree it was bleak, and I found it incredibly rich. So the same point about maybe seeing it in a gallery and having a chance to break it up a bit. I'm not sure if it was more than the sum of its parts or not, but I didn't have a problem with the subject matter, really. I thought it was an act of, it was about memory and remembering and doing honour to the experiences of migration of a generation, an older generation that has passed. And I certainly got that out of the footage and the sort of montage of more oblique contemporary footage that sort of visually spoke of isolation with the historical documentary kind of record footage.
There you go. Critics don't agree. Yeah, Jennifer?
One more thing about it. I do really like that the filmmaker is on an adventure and is experimental and is not sticking to standard form. And I think there are a lot of documentary, I mean, that a film that creates a world that is unique and is not fiction, a story of fiction, is in a way a document, and it's a document of its time. So I appreciate all of that, and I give the filmmaker credit for that. I think that there are a lot of examples of that kind of filmmaking, though, that are much more successful, and I would hope that the filmmaker, in proceeding, would investigate some of those and look to those as references. I mean, there are so many structural techniques that are available that do kind of give access, give really a form that people can follow and can learn more and get greater access to what's being intended. And I would hope that the filmmaker would continue and do that.
Okay, fully balanced. And we did want to include it in this because it is a very different kind of filmmaking, and it was the best example. But interestingly enough, it was one of the few British ones that we were able to use. So I mean, it will be available in a cinema near you. Okay, final film we're going to look at is Page One, A Year Inside the New York Times by Andrew Rossi. On Sunday, by the way, 6 o'clock in Showroom 2. So.
Welcome, everybody. We're here to take note of the fact that journalism is alive and well and feisty, especially at the New York Times.
Hey, did you send it? He's lying. There's 2 A1 meetings. 10:30 where we discuss the stories of the day and what we're going to offer. What's kind of a competition? You go in there and we fight to get on A1.
We are the New York Times and we are dictating terms. At the tender age of 31, I still had a year left of being the violent, drug-snorting thug before I found my way to this guy, the one with a family and a job at the New York Times.
All right, well, here's the lead. The Times was really where I wanted to work from when I was very young. I always had this idea of the place where great things happen and were done.
Oh, good, my sources are starting to come out.
I don't know why anybody who's a reporter isn't on Twitter.
You see him at his desk, and he just embodies everything about new media.
I still can't get over the feeling that Brian Stelter was a robot assembled to destroy me.
The old newspaper model is dying.
It's this kind of collision of two worlds, and this new world that just kind of wants to crack it all open.
So this is about WikiLeaks, which is a website. They didn't have to drop this off on the front step of NBC News or the New York Times. They just dropped it off on YouTube and waited for everybody else to find it.
The bottom line is, WikiLeaks doesn't need us. In the immediate moment, we're in the middle of cutting 100 people out of a staff.
How scared are you right now?
I've been a single parent on welfare. This is nothing.
I almost feel like I don't have a clear grasp on the enormity of the situation.
Could the New York Times go out of business?
If you think of the history of these institutions, Watergate, Abu Ghraib, I think we're at a dangerous moment in American journalism.
Some stories are beyond the database. Sometimes people have to walk past the conventional wisdom.
They asked if anybody who wanted to volunteer for Baghdad, so I'm going to Iraq.
News is not dying.
The Times still, I think to a remarkable degree, does set the agenda.
The New York Times has dozens of bureaus all over the world, and we're going to toss that out and kick back and see what Facebook turns up. I don't think so.
Okay, we're going to be fast and furious on this. We're finishing on a documentary that's about journalism and that actually will have an impact in some ways on documentary makers, anyone, certainly in current affairs, some of the themes it raises, I mean. But fast and furious, so we can go out to the audience. Jennifer, what do you reckon?
I have to say, right up front, I work for the New York Times. I am paid by the New York Times. My paycheck comes from the New York Times. I write for About.com. About.com is the 11th largest website in the world. When you talk about new media, I would say that we're rather substantial. I find it remarkable that this film, which is ostensibly about how the New York Times is dealing with the issue of new media and relating to new media, that a new media entity that it bought in 2005 and is now actually fiscally supporting the New York Times is not even mentioned. So I speak from a very kind of
bitter point of view.
Not bitter. I would say, it's not bitter. It's not bitter at all. I don't get what this film's about, and I don't think that it's particularly representative of any kind of real investigation.
Okay, that's an interesting take for a start off. AJ, what did you think? I mean, I read the New York Times. It's got some talk about flawed characters. There's plenty of them in here. But on the themes, what do you reckon?
Well, first of all, in that trailer, from the people who brought you Waiting for Superman, Food Inc., that's amazing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just saw that for the first time. Yeah. I mean, Participant, who is the people, came in to help with the outreach campaign. They didn't make the film. No. So it's that in itself, I have to say, I'm a little mind blown by. Excuse me. I don't know what film I saw. I know they're still working on it, or supposedly are still cutting it. They're changing the Sundance cut. I know that they rushed to finish in time for Sundance. The version I saw a few months ago, I think, was that version. I could see that it had been rushed to finish for Sundance. I didn't think that the ideas had been fully formed. David Carr is a great character, and could have, should have.
He's a kind of he's kind of an ex-crack addict, become kind of media, typical hack journalist, but kind of from this peculiar background. Sorry.
Yeah, he could have, should have been a central character in a film about himself that dealt with all of these same topics. I think that there's a bit of false advertising in that the film, calling itself Page One, there's a Page One meeting where all of the editors come in. There's two of those in the film. The majority of the film, almost the whole film, is about the media desk, which there are some interesting stories that they're dealing with, and David is obviously part of this desk, and he's an interesting character, great character, but it doesn't sort of, in a way, the big story that happens, which is the Times going from not knowing who WikiLeaks is or what WikiLeaks is to collaborating with WikiLeaks, they're not in the place to actually get that, story. All that said, it's going to do very well in the US, and I understand why people have joined onto it, because it's the kind of film that the audiences that go to see documentaries this is like New York Times, well, you said poverty porn. This is like NPR porn. This is like the kind of thing that they absolutely will probably flock to. So, good for them.
Nick?
And us too, I'd say. You know, it's grist for all of us, I think. I just found it an incredibly frustrating experience. I just don't think they got the structure right. I found it kind of a mess. As well as David Carr, I thought Brian Stelter was potentially an amazing character. But they didn't come out. They weren't presented up front. You had to work out where the film was going as it unfolded. It mortgaged itself to this sort of structuring device of, because they forwent voiceover, which I think they really needed to block it out and chapter it up. They mortgaged themselves to this device where whenever anyone was talking, if they got onto a second subject at the end of a train of thought, that would then be the next subject of the film. And it didn't work, and it just felt all over the place. And even chronologically, in terms of telling you the story of the year in news that you were watching, we had different WikiLeaks stories at the beginning and end, and it gave you no help remembering that at the beginning it wasn't the story that we've all just been through in the last few months. It didn't take you back.
Okay, Angus?
I actually liked it quite a lot. I think I agree with the problems in terms of the form of it and so on, and maybe the final cut will be a bit different. But the content of it though kind of swung it for me. The characters like David Carr, but actually the fundamental issues that are being debated in there between the kind of old school hard news values versus the Gawker big board give the people what they want dilemma, and around that the figure of Julian Assange giving people what he thinks they want, and they have an interesting debate about editing down the collateral murder video and whether or not that's true. So there's this old school thing, you get that in the A1 meetings as well, a real obsession for the truth and the facts. And cut through, you have a lot of figures lamenting the authoritative tone, I think it's Clay Shirky, or the arrogance of old school journalism, which believes it's right. And that's kind of very popular opinion, and I imagine it's what we're going to get onto in the next bit of the discussion, that there's something wrong with these arrogant guys who can tell us what to think. However, as soon as Sam Zell and the LA Trib come on, right, here's this corrupt businessman with no respect for anything but the bottom line, who's echoing this same radical opinion, right? So he's up there saying, let's knock them off their arrogant post. I hate these old school journalists. And then the story really develops because David Carr is set on him. And then you suddenly get, whether you love or hate David Carr, you're suddenly in this moment, he turns into a real journalist of a very admirable type, going after the story with great tenacity, uncovering the bankruptcy that Sam Zell's driven the LA Trib into, the amorality of the operation on any number of levels. And then you begin to think, well, there might be something in this hard news attachment, pursuit of the truth, that might be worth salvaging after all. And I think it's best put, just to finish, by Bernstein, and they have great access to the all-stars of American journalism. Bernstein, of course, from Watergate, saying it's our job to be judicious and not judicial, that we should always pursue the best version of the truth available. And I think that distinction between judicious and judicial, trying to find out the truth rather than lay down the law, is something that is very, very important to hold on to.
Danny?
Well, just very quickly, I'd echo a lot of the scepticism around the film, actually. And I think the other point I'd make as well is that if you're looking at because the film attempts to do much more than just tell the story of a year in the life of the New York Times, it's essentially trying to go back at least 10 years and sort of cover the whole demise of it. The story of Jason Blair, who was the sort of serial plagiarist who filled the front pages of the New York Times with bullshit, essentially, is, I felt, glossed over. And Judith Miller, who filled the front pages of the New York Times with bullshit justifications to go to war, is also, the stuff is in there, and the filmmakers have been quite canny in terms of covering themselves, but you think the narrative weight, I mean, the damage that was done to the New York Times, even from an English perspective, of Jason Blair and then Judith Miller, this sort of double whammy, the way this is almost sort of brushed under the carpet. So, and David Carr is incredibly entertaining, and the footage of David Carr with the editors of Vice, you know, just socking it to them, you just want to stand on your chair and start cheering, you know, it's just like death to hipsters the world over, it's brilliant. But that's not the real story there, and so it's interesting. We talked about Up in Smoke, and one of the flaws of Up in Smoke being that it's like a kind of an advert, essentially. I think Page One is an advert, essentially, too.
That's very interesting, only in as much as I never saw it like that at all myself, but mainly because I'm not kind of interested in whether the New York Times is doing an advert or not, because it raised so many issues for me that I just spent so long talking about the issues it raised. So for me, it didn't feel like Up in Smoke, because I thought, maybe it's because I'm interested in all the issues, but I think, you know, I suppose if you're looking at it from the point of view of the owners of New York Times, is it just an advert? But it also, for anyone who's interested in journalism, current affairs, truth, this is going to be a film that everyone's going to want to show their students, show around, and all the rest of it.
Is it?
Yeah, no, because of the issues it raises, not in terms of, and that's it. So no, you've made me think again. That's what critics are for. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I'm saying I watch it in a particular way. Then you get critics saying something. You think, oh, that's interesting. I might think about that again. So I was trying to be nice to you then.
Thank you, Claire.
Bloody hell.
I
can't compliment critics without being defensive. Anyway, we're about to go out to the audience, but before we do that, can I just ask you to at least give them a bit of a round of applause at this point for... Okay, over to you guys. I really just want to see if anyone wants to talk about criticism or documentary making or any of the things that we raised. And there you are. Lady there, yeah.
So I've got a question about what critics are for. Now, it was interesting how you compared Up in Smoke with If a Tree Falls, because it made an interesting peg for you to focus your conversation and your criticism about the film, so it was very convenient for your table. But my question is, you're doing that for you, to make you sound, you know, what you want to say, but how do you feel that affects the film and the filmmakers? Because you've compared one film which was made by a first-time director for £70,000 and one film made by a very established director which has been fully funded. So how do you feel about trying to compare those and use that as a peg for your voices? I'd like to ask you that. No,
good question. And by the way, I editorialised on that one, so that's my decision. So to be fair to them, they could just answer that. But you get the gist of what the question is. People sometimes do not compare like with like for the purposes of getting a good article out of it. Mm-hmm. Anyone want to pick that up?
I need to say that I try not to do that.
Okay. But what are critics for? You can see what she's asking. I mean, all right. Anyone else who wants to just say that they do it from time to time, compare films or...
I compare films a lot.
Yeah, go on.
I compare films. And I think that the comparison... and I don't necessarily compare films because I think that readers need to think about the comparison. I compare films because I think I'm also read by a lot of filmmakers. And I've mentioned a couple of times, well, there are these films that exist that do this perhaps more successfully or something else. And I think that part of, that a critic's function or purpose is not to rule on whether a film is good or bad. I don't, it's to have people think about films. And sometimes comparing films makes that kind of thought happen. And that's why I do it. I do think that I tend, when I said earlier when we were talking about the Toynbee film, that this is a first-time filmmaker. And I think that looking at a first-time film, first of all, it's extraordinarily difficult to get a film made. So right then and there, you've got to give credit to the filmmaker, even if they've done a lousy job. They've gone through with something and they've actually accomplished it, so good on you. You know, that's my feeling. But from there, there are other things that you look at and you progress. And I would look at Up in Smoke in a very different way than I would look at Marshall's films, because I know Marshall's films, and I feel like I understand him and I get him as a filmmaker. And that gives me tools with which to express or interpret, if you will, or encourage other people to see his films. And I think also that he would listen to me about what I have to say about his films and understand and appreciate that. So yes, I think it's valid to compare films, and yeah.
Okay, Angus, very quickly, then I'll go back out.
I think you actually have to compare them. I mean, and I think the best way of encouraging young filmmakers is to honestly mark them down when they get things wrong, not to give them gold stars for trying. I don't think that is honest criticism. You have to compare these things, because what I'd be worried about, what seems to underlie your question, is that it wouldn't be fair in some ways to put these two together because one had more money behind it than the other. But if you introduce that idea of I can't compare because they're not the same, then I think you would actually lose any ability to make judgments about things. You have to be aware of how things are made, of course, but it's by putting them up against each other that you will find out more about each one of them.
And budget shouldn't come into play in that. I mean, John's film is clearly not made for a lot of money, but is a more successful film.
I think there's a distinction, I think, just very quickly, a distinction between just comparing a film in terms of contextualising it and discussing it purely in terms of its relationship with another film. I think that's, I mean, obviously you make comparisons all the time, we all do that. It reminded me of, it's got tones of this, that, or the other, but I think it's problematic. I don't think we did that, to be fair, but I mean, it's problematic if you review something only in relation to something else.
Okay, thanks. Guy there.
To what extent can you be a filmmaker and a critic? Are the two mutually exclusive? Does it give you insight, or does it mean that you can't be objective?
Okay, thanks. And listen, I'm going to gather a couple of things together, just then you can pick up anything you want. There's somebody there. Sorry, the lighting's a bit rubbish. So right at the back, there's somebody as well. Yes?
No, I was going to ask, when you're writing a critique, what are you trying to achieve? Is it just an opinion? Because lots of people give an opinion. Or, in the age of Charlie Brooker, or I think of Victor Lewis Smith, who are trying to do something else with their critique. So I just wondered what you're trying to achieve and why, particularly with so many people giving opinions these days.
Okay, good question. Right at the very back there.
I have a question, I hope it makes sense. It seems that a lot of fiction films get like 1-star reviews. I've never really seen that with a documentary film. Usually they're given 3 stars or above. Is that because critics are too nervous to give 1 star to something that actually exists and is real and means something to someone? Or is it, I just wondered about that kind of thing.
Okay, anyone want to pick up anything, basically?
I'll pick up the 1-star point just very quickly. I mean, I think...
Speak slightly closer to the mic.
I think there probably is an aspect of that, actually. I mean, I think that the default position tends to be that even if a documentary isn't seen as being very good, it's sort of seen as noble, and that if you whether it's a star rating or just a prose review, if you slag something off, it's seen that you're sort of dismissing the subject as well. So I think there is probably a kind of timidity among critics not to be seen. I mean, something like Up in Smoke, actually. Up in Smoke is nowhere near a 1-star film. It's much better than that. But I think certain people, you might be tempted to pull your punches because you wouldn't want to be seen to be, in any way belittling the importance of the issue,
Well, it's also, I was just wanted to ask you, because it's not just, first of all, I think that's a real problem, by the way. I mean, I think that across the... No, I know, but I'm saying I think that's a real problem. I think it happens in theatre, which I'm all familiar with, and so on and so forth, which is, oh God, I'm frightened to say this is a rubbish play because it's about anti-racism, and people might think I'm saying something bad. That's bad. But I was actually going to say as well, is that in documentaries sometimes, which feels a little bit... the kind of advocacy for documentary, because it's not always treated seriously. I sometimes find that people are frightened to criticise new documentaries that come out in case it's seen that you're having a go at documentary, and that somehow we've all got to be rah-rah about documentary per se. But, I'm an enthusiast for documentary, but I don't want to have to collapse my critical faculties just because I'm pro-documentary. So I just wondered if that was a tension. But AJ, any thoughts on any of these questions?
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I wrote a piece a few years ago. There was a panel at IDFA with some very respected and well-thought-of critics, and one of the points that was made was if a film was going to cure cancer but it was terrible, would you give it a bad review, and everyone basically was like, no, I wouldn't. I would say it was good, even if I knew it was bad, because it had. I mean, then that's obviously an extreme case, but I think that that's part of the problem, and this is a discussion that you and I have had. Is, you know, if we ultimately want people to see these films, and the only way to get people to see the film is that they think that they've seen something good, and that they will see something good, and so if we tell them that, you know, the film that's not good is good just because it's important, and everyone's idea of what is important varies, I think we lose our audience. And so that when the really well-crafted film about something important comes out, no one will want to go see it, because there's this sort of like drumming in of, well, you said that X or Y film was a film I should see about an important topic, and I wasn't compelled to do anything or feel anything. And then just quickly to your question, I'm in a very strange position. I don't consider myself a critic, but I do write about films critically sometimes, more often when I really like them. But occasionally when I have a film like Page One, for example, which I haven't written about yet, and I'm still trying to decide whether I will, where I think that there are a lot of interesting failings that actually are interesting to talk about. There was a film a few years ago that everyone else loved, Trouble the Water. I didn't care for, and I wrote about that film, and then spent the next year sort of making up with the filmmakers. I am friends with Lucy Walker. I didn't like Wasteland. I wrote about why I didn't like Wasteland. I have been told that I'm the only person who has ever said anything bad about Wasteland by Lucy. And now I have this weird dance with her. I run an award for documentary for which these films may be nominated or eligible. So even doing this is a little weird for me. Just to answer your question, it's I don't know. Every day it's just what. Yeah, my last film had terrible reviews, but strangely, like, got great reviews on its festival run, like unanimously, like, praising reviews. And then when it came out in New York, all the New York critics bashed it and basically said that the characters were so minor that they didn't care and we didn't have access.
So were those different critics reviewing it at the festival from the release?
I actually think we got better critics on the festival run, because when we got to New York,
of course you do.
It was yeah, exactly. Smarter, more intelligent, more handsome. No, when we got to New York, we got sort of like the fourth and fifth and sixth people, and who were writing just like blurby pieces. And I don't care so much about getting bad reviews if it feels like that a critic has really wrestled with my film, and that I see something in what they're saying. Whether it's a positive review or a negative review, the worst reviews to me as a filmmaker are ones where it seems like it was just a review that they had to crank out because that was the assignment. And there's like, and as someone who writes about films, I know sometimes there's not a lot to say. So then you feel like, oh, did I not compel the person to do something? Was the film not compelling in that way? Or was it just like, you know, in the stack of 8 that they had to finish that week?
Danny, you wanted to come
in
quick?
I think it's really interesting. I don't think that, I would say this, I guess, because, you know, I write about films and I don't make films. I don't think you have to be a filmmaker to look critically at films. But I think it's incredibly useful to have some experience of getting a kicking, you know, because where I come into this is as a writer, and I've written books, and they've had good reviews and they've had bad reviews, and I found that incredibly informative when I'm writing about films, to have been slagged off in print, in the case of, you know, in my own paper in The Guardian, you know. That informed you, I think, as a critic. You know, I like AJ, I sort of think, I really dread to think of a big sign over my head saying critic. It's not something I'm comfortable with at all, but obviously I do criticism. And having been reviewed, I think is invaluable in that sense. And I think it was very interesting, you know, The Guardian's website, I think, was one of the first to kind of open up its regular journalists to kind of do the little comments that you get on the end of the pages. And I think that was a hilarious process, because obviously I'd kind of been through the mill and having produced stuff and had it reviewed. But for a lot of people, it was their first experience of that, and the sort of shrieks of girlish horror that would sort of ring around The Guardian as people suddenly, as that sort of one-party state suddenly broke down. And journalists and critics were being reviewed. I mean, it was a very interesting period. You know?
Can I say something related as well? I went to film school, and a lot of the students and the teachers there felt it really useful to have regular sessions amongst each other of critiquing each other's work. And that was actually part of that helped open their eyes to how the film was coming along and what would make it better. And I believe that Pixar, perhaps alone amongst the studios at the moment, still make that a kind of regular routine of how they build up a film. So there's sort of criticism as in getting a kicking and someone just sort of pouring scorn all over what you're trying to do, and then there's analysing and constructive criticism and trying to point out what's working, what's not working. I think that, I think is a really useful thing for filmmakers. Of course, it's not that we're all necessarily writing reviews for filmmakers. We have an audience as well. But, I think criticism ought to be useful.
I think that's I'll just say very quickly, I think it's where it becomes quite difficult is because I think I would imagine all of us, when we're looking at films, attempt to do it as analytically and respectfully as possible. But I do think there's also an appetite out there for for critics to just essentially sling rotten fruit at filmmakers.
Because it's entertaining.
And people do seem to respond to that, So
well, that might be true, but I suppose the converse for me, I'm not familiar with this so much in documentary, but when I've sort of done something on in the arts and so on, is when people have said, and I thought it was interesting, AJ, that you said about like falling out with people, because it is quite tricky. If you're a critic, you have to write about people maybe that you work with. If you're a music critic, you have to write about people who are in your world because you hang out with musicians and so on and so forth. But you have to have a certain bravery about it, because the converse of this is, if there's no critics, there's just PR. And I once was on a panel where the kind of musicians, it's classical music, and they were sort of saying to the classical music, you're destroying classical music. How will anyone come to it if people like you criticise it? And all the rest of it. And they said, we tried really hard and we were doing this. And it's like, so, well, what do you want? I mean, you put out a press release. You want me to just reproduce it? And they sort of said, well, that would be good. And then you think, well, yeah, I know it would be good for you, but actually for the audience, i.e. the public, they maybe deserve more than just getting a press release by the person who wants you to think it's good. So I think that regardless of defensiveness, there's an important role for, even if it's not you individuals, for somebody saying to the audience, I've looked at this is my opinion, and it's not just their opinion. So.
Well, I want to say that to Jennifer's point, that she's been making about Marshall. One of the things I think in terms of documentary that I would like to see more of, and there's a few critics who do it, but not in the same way that fiction filmmakers sort of can be compared to their previous work, and talk about how, in terms of comparing films, like how If a Tree Falls compares to Racing Dreams or Street Fight. In my case, in writing about Wasteland, it was because I knew Lucy's previous films that I could write about it. And I think that doesn't happen that often. I guess part of what I liked about the early reviews of Convention, my more recent film, people wrote about it in the context of the two films I had made before that. And when it got to the end and it was just these like short blurbs, it felt pretty clear that they didn't know anything about either my work as a filmmaker or as a writer, and how that film might sort of play into it. And maybe that's just me wanting to be the center of attention. But you'd like that kind of thoughtfulness, especially when people start to have longer careers.
Okay, Angus?
Well, I think, if critics could agree on anything, they should get together and form a kind of critics union and get rid of the star rating system and refuse to do star ratings on films at all, because that's really a bastardization or a kind of lazy way of doing what criticism should be about, which I think is more than an opinion. It should be trying to get at whether something is good or bad. Now, that's not an objective scientific fact, of course, and that's why the star rating system is so iniquitous, because the trying to work out whether something is good or bad is a very difficult, complex process that is absolutely trivialized by marking something 1 to 4. Worth just remembering that to be critical means to make a decision, and it's an exercise of judgment and taste, hopefully on the part of somebody who's got a lot of experience and knowledge and can compare a whole range of documentary films and bring that to bear. That doesn't mean they're right with a capital R, but it may well be the case that their judgment is more informed than yours. And also, as I think people are usefully reflecting, is something that the filmmakers really need, desperately need genuine informed criticism if they're to get better, because exercising judgment is to kind of cultivate your taste, which hopefully the critic has done, and hopefully you will do, reading his criticism, and think for yourself about what you're seeing, and hopefully the filmmakers as well will learn to be better filmmakers through receiving that judgment of somebody else.
Jennifer?
As far as the star rating system goes, I'm required to do it. I have an employer, and I have a template that I work with. And my solution to that is to give everything a 4 out of 5. The things that don't qualify for a 4, unless I truly hate them, I mean really hate them, and need to write about them because I hate them so much, those get a lower star rating, maybe 1 or 2. But everything else gets a 4 that I think is, and fortunately I'm in a position of being able to choose what I write about. I am an unabashed advocate for documentary film. I live in a world where documentary film gets this much space out of all of this space, and I fight for it. I fight for front page coverage. I fight for documentary in general. So I don't like taking a film that I don't feel is going to be well understood, received on some level, and talking about it, because I think it's a waste of energy in a certain kind of funny way. I used to work, I too have been worked actively in making films, so I do have some of that in my background. I'm aware of what some of the problems are, obviously. I've also worked as a theater critic. I found as a theater critic that I was very often approached by theater directors and asked to sit down with them after they'd read my reviews so that I could function in their lives as something of a dramaturg. In other words, give them ideas or guide them in some way, or just open up possibilities for them out of what my experience has been, what my perceptions are. And I like that relationship. It's not quite friendship, it's not quite advocacy, but it is very effective, and it allowed me as a critic to help, to further the cause, to further the art, and I appreciate that. I'm often asked now by filmmakers to sit with them when they're editing at some point and talk about what I see. I like doing that as well. I don't think that it's a contradiction. I don't think that I'm crossing the line or becoming friends or getting engaged in supporting their film or becoming a publicist in any way. Also, if I write anything that's in a press release or published anywhere else, I get fired. I mean, there's just no point, there's nothing about it. I cannot do that. Okay. So I've got to come up with my own thing.
Okay, we're at the end of time now. Unless somebody got something so desperate to say, I'm just going to thank our panel and we can just chat about this. What I would say is, there is somebody with something passionate to say, so we're going to say that. Let me just say, I'll take you. Just let me just say, because I know people are going off. We've discussed 5 films here. I hope the critics have been useful in giving you some guide to them. But in the end, the only reason why they've bothered to watch these films and talk about them is precisely so that you will be compelled or interested enough to go and see them, so that you can come back and fight with all these people in the bar afterwards and say you were talking rubbish. But that's the whole thing. It's a public conversation about what you think. Very last question there.
Very last question. I wonder how all of you feel. You don't necessarily have to answer, because I understand that we're out of time. But I'm not necessarily comfortable with critics deciding what belongs in the movie theater and what belongs in the museum. Specifically referring to the 9 Muses, which I think got sort of a brush off. And particularly with films that challenge the convention of the way that documentaries are made, right? That sort of push audiences to reconsider what documentary can be. I think that those films deserve a bit more careful consideration. And instead of saying, this would work better as an installation where you could sort of dip into and out of it, I think sort of dismisses the possibility of what documentary could be. So that's just my thought about your general response to the 9 Muses.
Useful challenge to the panel. Panel, 1 sentence each, short sentence, and run out. Starting at the end. On anything, the final thought you want to give the audience, and if you want to answer that last point. It can relate to that, whatever you want.
Well, I'll go.
All right, Angus.
I wouldn't put that one in the museum. I'd just put it in the dustbin, I'm afraid.
I agree with what you say. I think that filmmaking is a wide open field, and I think that filmmakers, documentary filmmakers in particular, are in a position where they have to, and I don't like to use this word, but I use it anyway, justify what their choices are. And I'm willing to buy whatever it is as long as it's justified. And I'm very interested in new forms. I'm interested in all the ways in which these documentary and narrative cross over. the use of documentary in narrative, the use of narrative in documentary. I'm interested in all the new media explosion.
Quick.
And go documentary is what I have to say.
Thanks. AJ?
I think that's an interesting challenge to how I think about films, because when I watch stuff in a festival context, I'm often contextualizing it in my head. So that's an interesting thing to think about, because sometimes I'll think like, maybe I would have liked this better if I saw it on television, and that was sort of my take on that particular film. Maybe the approach to it would have been more interesting to me, but that's a good challenge.
Okay. Yeah.
I didn't intend to give the film the brush off at all. I simply think that, it did actually come out of an installation project. In terms of, my point was that I think it should be projected on a massive scale. Whether you then call that an installation or whether you call that a documentary, which happens to be being projected on a massive scale, those are just terms anyway.
Okay, thanks. And finally.
Yeah, I'm more for being challenged, and I think we run away from it too much too often.
Okay, so you didn't exactly give the critics a kicking, but thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much to the critics. Actually, it was a really challenging discussion, and I think there should be actually more filmmakers here, not just to come here to kind of snipe at critics, but I think that filmmakers and critics have got a lot to offer each other and to discuss. And if filmmakers run away from criticism, documentary is not in a healthy place. Documentary wants to show a camera, put a camera on society, document it and ask some difficult and challenging questions. And if documentary makers are going to do that, then documentary makers also have to be prepared to enter into a robust and frank discussion. So I hope that even though not huge numbers of filmmakers are here today, that they'll watch this when it appears as a film on the Sheffield Doc Festival. To those of you who were here, thank you very much indeed. Can you thank the panel, because they were great. Thank you.